terribly hazardous spiral of regressions, the sort of thing one had to be careful of in Victoria Jail. Men went mad there. "If you think like a prisoner," said Lorenzo, "you are a prisoner for life." "Not me," said Annie Doultry. "But you are here," said the Portuguese, and it was undeniable. The loose Annie, liberty-loving, unpredictable, spontaneous, was as confined as anyone else in the prison. "Soon you'll be old, man," mocked Lorenzo. "People grow old fast here." That warning sank in. It helped explain Annie's thoughtful look. Once in prison was once too often. Annie Doultry had had little time to ask himself, where are you in life? Are you going to be a jailbird, or are you going to be your own man? He had taken that latter hope for granted, but he was too old to be lingering. You could say that it was prison that turned him into a full-blooded fatalist, and made him dangerous. The grown man himself had a nose bent a little to the left. This is what he had written in pencil under March 1st, his yesterday. "They say follow your nose. If I followed mine, I guess I would be a Bolshie. But mine is a nose that knows who is boss." There, his own words hint at it. At a level above mere punnery, the nose stood upon its battered cartilage as a sort of memorial to the mockery of the name that might have graced a fair Highland woman. "Annie Doultry rhymes with poultry," he repeated a number of times, testing his ear-plugs of candle wax as he screwed them in. Nothing wrong with the ears, their lobes pendulous in the style that indicated wisdom according to the Chinese, but the main organs compactly fitted beneath the hinges of a lantern jaw, notorious for its insensitivity. "A face to sink 1,000 ships," said Annie sonorously, as a final trial, and with the satisfaction of one who could no longer hear himself except as cello notes in his own bones. To turn from the inner life of the man to his three-dimensional situation. The lower bunk of a cell in D block, 7 feet by 5, with the usual grim appurtenances, shit-pail and ignoble window, glassless but thickly barred, its sill over 5 feet from the concrete floor, making it fiendishly difficult for a Chinese to see out. Not so hard for Annie Doultry, however, for he was a large man and terribly thick of thew. Thick-chested, thick thumbs and eyebrows, thick tendons of the wrist, and below the kneecap, and at the insertion of the hamstring, a valuable asset for a violent man a little past the years of youthful resilience, when being thrown out of bars and down companion ladders were just laughable excursions. Thick-bearded he was, too. They had tried to make him shave it off, but he had fought a moral battle with them, from barber to chief warder to the governor himself, and won it. So they had taken his hair, but left him his beard to play with. Subsequently, each hair had grown prouder, though admittedly greyer. It was an unusual grey, with the cuprite tinge that bronze develops when it takes what the imperial metal workers call the water patina. Annie had often looked at himself in his mirror, before he lost it. It was a metal mirror, not of great antiquity. It was stainless steel, with a hole to hang it from, 4 inches square and probably Pittsburgh-made for trading with Polynesian natives. The mirror was both kind and perceptive, like a rare friend. It stressed equally the deceptive youth and petulance of Doultry's mouth and the inexpressible faltering beauty of his eyes. Faltering, because they never quite looked back at themselves in that or any other mirror. The eyes were guarded because he did not wish them to expose him in any way. Beautiful by way of his mother, presumably, for his father was an ugly fellow, or perhaps just by way of contrast with the rustic ruin of the nose. His hair was not so thick, of course, and it was cropped repulsively short back and sides. This style was all the rage in the prison, for it denied living space to the poor overcrowded lice. The next thing was to get his socks in his hands in the correct manner. The heels should fit one in t'other, hand-heel in sock-heel, but the latter were giant vacuities, and the light was poor. The task had to be done. Nothing else guarded against the roaches. The Portuguese was moaning, which meant that he was asleep. No earplug was proof against that sound. "He is in the fearful presence of a Jesuitical dream," said Annie softly. He wished he could write this down in his school book, but the socks made it impossible. Or perhaps he is praying. Damnation was what the man wished to avoid at all costs. He had told Annie so. But what made his moans all the more impressive was their coincidental harmonic precision with a Chinese type of moan, straight from the throat in E-flat, and out through a mouth agape, and then the open window of the hospital ward. This pit of suffering was on the ground floor of A block, just across the alley. The one who moaned had been flogged 2 or 3 days ago. His wounds were ulcerating, and so on. But it must be made clear that the problem for Annie was not emotional or spiritual. It was a sleeping problem, for the buildings were all crammed together, and the acoustics were excellent. Annie lay back with the socks on his hands. On the great hairy pampas of his chest stood a ravaged tea-mug, its blue enamel all mottled with dark perfusions like aging internal bruises promising worse to come. Yet Annie treasured it, for it was his one remaining possession inside this tomb of a prison. The other things, the lighter without a flint, the metal mirror, the brass buckle with a camel's head, he had gambled away at the roach races. Besides, Annie liked his tea, and Corporal Strachan, retired, chief warder of D Block, would slip him an extra in this mug, Annie's own. Now, however, it was empty, as an unrewarded sin. On either side of it lay his big, bunched mitts, grey as stone, manos de piedra indeed, whose knuckles were protuberant, but the fingers astonishingly delicate, considering what they had been through. No pun intended. He remained still. Around his tea-mug, his chest was decorated with dried pellets of sorghum, a sort of mealy stuff, flavoured with ginger. This was a taste much favoured by cockroaches. His broad belly carried a trail of these pellets past his navel, via the folds of his filthy canvas pants down to his bare feet. The big toes rested with a look of weary dignity on the rusted bedstead. Along it was laid an enticing line of roach bait, like the fuse to a keg of TNT. Annie Doultry was lying in wait for his prey with all the punctilious preparation of a hunter of tigers or of leopards, using his own person in lieu of the tethered goat. For this was the essential feature of his plan, his personal attractiveness to the animals in question. If there is one dish a Chinese roach prefers to sorghum and ginger, it is the dried skin of a whitey's feet. They would not dream of devouring the living epidermis. They were not looking for trouble, but they favoured calluses as an Epicurean rabbi does smoked herring. To hold it against them, the roaches, that is, would be rank prejudice, but the fact was that a vulnerable foot was denuded of its natural protection. Feet became little engines of sensitivity. In Annie's case it was worse, for the roaches nibbled his fingers too through the torpid watches of the night. Oh, how delicately they chomped away at the husks of his fingertips. Never did they wake him, and circumspection was their motto. No doubt the fearful size of the man gave them pause. "Do not wake him," they whispered one to another as they satisfied their desire. Hence the socks on his hands. In a mood of stillness, Annie Doultry waited. The light became dimmer, the black cloud thickening with the approaching night. Under the black cloud, the prison. Doultry's cell was no different in shape or size from the other 312, but in status it was one of a select few, like an ancient and appalling Russian railway carriage with first class all in gold letters on its side. The top-floor view included the top strata of Victoria Peak and the governor's summer residence. Its Union Jack waited in the moist atmosphere like a proud dishcloth. The grub was better, too. Pork, twice a week, which was twice as much pork as the others got, the others being Chinese, a smaller race and less needful of meat according to colonial doctrine. And who will say they were wrong? Too much pork rots the colon's underwear and the upholstery of the beating heart. The top floor of D Block was called the E section, which need not confuse the student if he remembers that the E stood for